my dear students. I am your teacher, Michelle Tan, and this week we'll be discussing about contextual reading approaches. Before we proceed with our lesson, let me first present to you the learning objectives. After reading and understanding your module, you are expected to discuss how different contexts enhance the text, meaning, and enrich the reader's understanding. Now let us begin with our lesson about contextual reading approaches. All literary texts were written by different authors with different culture, background, society, and language. In this lesson, you will be able to understand text based on the author's biography, culture, and language. There are three contextual reading approaches that I'm going to present to you. The first one is literary reading through biographical context. The second one is literary reading through sociocultural context. And the third one is literary reading through linguistic context. Let us first discuss literary reading through biographical context. Literature is viewed from the life story of the author or any of the characters presented in the story. Through studying the author, readers may be able to connect the characters and their morals to the author's life and analyze the patterns of behavior shown between and among the characters, the author, and the reader himself. While it is important for us to know the characters in a literary piece, it is also essential for us to understand the biography or the life of the author for us to be able to know his or her techniques or ways in writing. Here are biographical strategies that you may use in your reading. Research on what the author believes in and also what he or she does not. Analyze how the author's belief system is reflected in his or her work. Look at the author's other works and analyze if there is a pattern with regard to the theme that is indicative of his or her life and beliefs. Understanding the life of the author is important for us to understand his or her works thoroughly. When you are reading literature through a biographical context, you might consider some of the following questions. What biographical facts has the author used in the text? What insights do readers acquire about the author's life by reading the text? Now let us go to literary reading through a sociocultural context. In reading using the sociocultural context, you will examine the factors that affect the writing of the literary text and how the work was received by the readers during the time it was written. Reading using the sociocultural context helps you understand the social, economic, political, and cultural factors or forces affecting the work that you are reading. Aside from understanding a literary text through a biographical perspective, it is also important to note the year or period the literature was written for us to understand and identify the historical events that took place in that year. So, how can we analyze a text through a sociocultural context? Here are guide questions that you may want to answer when you are reading literature through the sociocultural context. What is the relationship between the characters or the speakers in the text and in their society? Does the text explicitly address issues of gender, race, or class? How does the text resolve these issues? Who has the power? Who does not? What is the reason for this setup? How does this story reflect the nation? What does this say about the country and its inhabitants? Who has the economic or social power? Is there oppression or class struggle? How do the characters overcome this? Does money or finances play a large role in the narrative? What is the prevailing social order? Does the story or poem accept or challenge it? So these are the questions that will serve as your guide in reading literary texts through sociocultural perspective or context. You may also use several sociological, economic, and cultural perspectives when reading using the sociocultural context. One of the famous perspectives is the Marxism. According to the Marxist perspective, literature shows class struggle and materialism. Thus, it looks into the social classes portrayed in the work. It also looks into how the text serves as propaganda material. It also examines oppression, social conflicts, and solution to these struggles as shown in the literary work. Another perspective is the feminism. This examines the role of the women in the literature. One example of this is the chicklet. It looks into how the female character may be empowered or discriminated. Another perspective is the queer theory. This perspective focuses on the third gender, meaning the gay, lesbians, and other characters or persona in literature. Another perspective is historicism, or traditional historical criticism, which deals with the history that influenced the writing of literature. And one example of this is the timeline of literature, which we discussed during the first week of our modular learning. Post-colonialism is a literary perspective that looks into the changes in the attitude of the post-colonists after the colonial period. Through this perspective, the dependence or independence of the colonized countries or people are being examined. And the last but not the least perspective is the new historicism, which focuses not only on the history when the literary text was written, but also how the history happened. It is in this perspective wherein the above-mentioned perspectives can be integrated with each other. Another context is the literary reading through a linguistic context. Reading through a linguistic context focuses on the language used in the literary work and how it is used to convey meaning. The following are some strategies you may use to read a text through the linguistic context. Analyze the diction or choice of words in the text. So, are the words simple enough to be easily understood, or are they complicated? Examine the text's syntax or meaning, the use of sentences, clauses, phrases, or the line cuts. Observe the use of figurative language or the figures of speech, like the use of simile, metaphor, oxymoron, personification, and other figures of language, figures of speech. We have to analyze the mood and tone of the text. Is the tone of the literary text happy or sad? Is it negative or positive? Observe the text's overall structure and analyze the content of the text. Now, here are the guide questions that may help you when you read literature through the linguistic context. What were the striking words in the text? What words were unfamiliar to you? Which words attracted your attention? What words were dramatic? What nouns are the most prominent? I hope you still remember your nouns. Are these concrete or abstract nouns? What about verbs or action words? Does the author use common words or lofty diction? Are the words short or long? Is there any word that has two or more meanings? So you have to be very careful with those words. Are the sentences in the usual order of subject predicate? What are the dependent clauses? What are the independent clauses? If you restructure a sentence or a phrase, would it make a difference? Is the voice active or passive? When we say active voice, the subject does the action and the passive voice is the opposite of it. Is there a rhythm in the sentence structure in relation to the length of the sentences or lines? And the next question is, what literary devices are used? Are there images? Do those images stand for anything aside from their literal meaning? Or are these images help you in understanding the text? What is the tone? Is the speaker happy about the subject? Is the tone negative or positive? What is the structure of the text? Is it a narrative? Is it linear or nonlinear? What is the point of view of the text? Is it a poem? If yes, then what type of poem is it? Does the language help in delivering and understanding its content? Is there a theme? What is it saying about its subject matter? How do the literary texts or elements contribute to the effectiveness of the text? So these are the guide questions that will help you in reading literature through the linguistic context. So again, there are three contextual reading approaches, namely biographical context, which focuses on the author's biography for us to understand the text, sociocultural context, which focuses on the society and culture and the time when the literary piece was written, and the linguistic context, which focuses on the language of the literary piece. So I hope that you have learned something from our lesson this week. So thank you, and always remember, ang handang isip, handa bukas. Tara, ML na tayo!